In the wizarding world, names like Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley are sung like legends. Their courage, loyalty, and triumphs are etched into the very fabric of magical history. Yet there is one name, one individual, who is often overlooked, forgotten even, despite the immense impact he had during those pivotal years at Hogwarts. That name is Neville Longbottom. For many, Neville was always the awkward, clumsy boy who couldn't cast a spell correctly and whose most memorable moment involved being tripped by his own broomstick during a Quidditch match. And yes, for much of his early years, he was often written off as the sidekick, the one who wasn't quite as brave or talented as Harry or his other friends. But what few realized until much later was that Neville was, in fact, one of the most crucial figures in the fight against Voldemort. He was a hero, not despite his shortcomings, but because of them. One part narrative. Neville Longbottom's quiet courage. It was late in the evening when Neville found himself standing alone, outside the Forbidden Forest. The rest of his friends had gone to bed, their laughter still echoing through the corridors of Gryffindor Tower. But Neville had lingered. It wasn't that he didn't enjoy their company. He did, deeply. But there were things about himself. Things he didn't want to share, things he wasn't sure anyone could understand. Neville had always been the second-choice hero. It was Harry, Hermione, and Ron who had always led the charge, the ones everyone looked to in times of crisis. But Neville? He had been the one to watch from the sidelines, always wondering if he had it in him to be more. It wasn't that he lacked courage. Neville had proven that time and time again, but it was the sense of being overshadowed that gnawed at him. He had never been the chosen one, the brilliant one, the famous one. He was just Neville Longbottom, the one who could barely remember his spells, the one who could barely get through a lesson without stumbling over his words. But on this evening, as he stared into the darkened trees of the Forbidden Forest, something changed. His thoughts wandered back to the many times he had doubted himself. He remembered the troll in the dungeon in their first year, the grueling herbology lessons where he had been laughed at, the many times his wand had failed him when he needed it most. But all that had changed. He had stood on the edge of a battle that would define his life and the future of the wizarding world. And he had made a choice. Neville had never been one for grand speeches or dramatic moments. His bravery was quiet, steady, and often unseen. He wasn't the type to rush into the limelight or claim victory for himself. But when the time came, he was always there, unshaken by fear. He had been there when the Death Eaters attacked the school, and he had been there during the Battle of Hogwarts, when it mattered most. As Neville stood outside, his mind wandered back to that fateful moment, the one that no one seemed to talk about, the one that had altered the course of history. It was not Harry Potter who had destroyed the last of Voldemort's Horcruxes, though Harry had done many great things. No, it was Neville. In that final, desperate moment, it had been Neville who had stood tall and delivered the killing blow. The sword of Gryffindor gleamed in his hand as he looked down at Nagini, the serpent that had been Voldemort's most loyal companion. With a single, precise stroke, Neville had slain her, the last obstacle between Voldemort and his downfall. The silence that followed the deed was deafening. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as though the world had held its breath, knowing that the prophecy had finally been fulfilled, not through destiny, but through sheer determination and through the courage of one man who had long been overlooked. It wasn't that Neville had known he was the one meant to deliver that blow. He had simply acted. He had simply been the man he had become, the one who had fought through his doubts, his fears, and his insecurities. His bravery wasn't the type that could be written in books or shouted from the rooftops. It wasn't the bravery of a hero who sought recognition. It was the bravery of a man who did what had to be done, because no one else could. As he stood there, Neville could still feel the weight of that moment. He had never asked for the accolades, never desired the praise, but he couldn't help but feel a twinge of frustration as he realized that in the years to come, it would not be his name that was remembered, at least not as it deserved to be. It was Harry's name that would be etched into history. Harry's bravery that would be sung in ballads. And yet Neville knew the truth. Neville Longbottom had been the one to finish the job.